You're listening to Nutrition Matters Podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Hey everyone, it's Paige, your favorite nutrition podcaster and dietitian. Nutrition Matters Podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. This podcast relies on the support of listeners like you and needs donations to keep this project running. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at pagesmothersrd.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click Reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Paige Smathers RD if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Nutrition Matters Podcast. As you already know, my name is Paige Smathers and I'm your host. And today I'm sharing a little bit of a different type of podcast with you. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go on someone else's podcast, and I thought that the content that we talked about was really relevant to my audience as well. So I decided that I would republish it here. So this podcast episode is all about pregnancy, nutrition questions that a lot of people have. And I discuss it with another podcast host named Braxton Dudson. And we just had a really good time discussing these things and kind of taking a different angle on discussing nutrition than, a lot of people who aren't familiar with intuitive eating or health at every size or those types of things sort of maybe have never been exposed to the idea of sort of weight neutrality and working on a healthy relationship with food. So we discuss that in here in context of before pregnancy, during pregnancy, and after pregnancy. And before I get into this and share the episode with you, I just want to say a few things really quickly. The first is I'd like to invite anyone who's interested to join us over on the Facebook group. It is just Nutrition Matters Podcast Community. And that's a lot of fun where we discuss the episodes a little bit in more depth together. And it's a nice way to kind of be around others who have similar views and who are working on similar things that you are. And really engaging in this work, which is a lot of fun to kind of not feel alone with it sometimes. And then the second thing I want to be sure that you know about is that I am now taking long distance clients. And if you're interested in checking out my coaching services and applying to be a client, go ahead and head on over to pagesmothersrd.com/individuals, or just hover over services and click on individuals and scroll down to kind of the middle of that page, and there's a button that says apply to be a long distance client. Just go ahead and fill out that application, and I'll get back with you to see if we would be a good fit to work together long distance. And then the third thing I always want to make sure that my listeners know about is my online course, which is a 10-week course that's designed to help you walk away from dieting and learn how to unlock your own inner wisdom around food. And this course is really perfect for anybody who kind of knows that diets don't work, but isn't really sure what to do instead. And I walk you through the science and the art of how to make that happen in real life. It's a lot of fun. And the best news is you get lifetime access to all of the course materials for the lifetime of the course. And I always am really active in the supportive Facebook group that's associated with the course as well. And so that's another fun thing that's available to you. So check that out at pagesmothersrd.com/course just to see if that might be a good fit for you and what you're looking for, and maybe a good addition to your journey towards more peace with food. Okay, and with that, I would love to share this episode. And again, this is from Braxton's podcast called Birds and Bees Podcast. And so you'll hear his intro and his sort of introducing the topic and me, and I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Birds and the Bees Podcast, Episode 9. We're glad you're listening. Today we've got a really great interview for you. I interviewed Paige Smathers of Salt Lake City, Utah. She's a registered dietitian, and we sat down specifically to talk about nutrition and pregnancy. Now, I thought it was really interesting because a lot of the times that I see people come out saying, oh, we're pregnant, like on Facebook and things along those lines, a lot of people talk about, okay, this is what you've got to eat, or you're eating for 2, or you're not eating for 2, or this is what you're supposed to do. And there seems to be so many different opinions on what you shouldn't do, what diets work, what's good, what you need to do in order to have a healthy pregnancy with nutrition. And so I went to Facebook and asked the question of what people have been told before. And we get into that a little later on in the episode about what people have been told. And Paige gets to field some of those questions or some of those myths. And we talk about diets, specifically ones that people have said, yes, use this diet for pregnancy. And I really had a fun time talking with her. I mean, really getting into the nitty-gritty of what you can do while you're pregnant. And even this isn't just for people that are pregnant or are planning on being pregnant. I learned a lot myself, and I will never be pregnant. So I think anyone that's real interested in understanding a little bit more about nutrition, about moderation, balance, and variety when it comes to their eating habits, Paige Smathers has got an amazing set of skills and knowledge that she gives to us on this episode. We talk a little bit about morning sickness, as well as the myths that are out there about trying to get your baby to be born early. The thing I liked the most about interviewing Paige was she had a very sweet sense about her. None of what she was saying was judgmental about the way that we eat. She has a different approach of how we as humans can approach food, and I think you're all going to really like it. I sure enjoyed doing this interview, and I believe you all are going to enjoy it as well. Remember, if you have any questions about the show, or if you'd like to join the conversation, get onto facebook.com/birdsandbees podcast. You can also give us a call at 385-449-1818. Leave a voicemail message there. We'd love to hear from you. I especially would love to hear what your story was being pregnant, or what your fears are of being pregnant, or what you think you ought to be eating. It'd be great to hear what your stories are. You can also find us on Twitter at Birds and Bees Pod. And if you're enjoying the show and the content that we have, we'd love to hear what you would like to hear in future episodes, but also consider leaving us a review at iTunes. The reviews let us reach out to more people, get this information distributed to more and more people as iTunes finds that, hey, we're really a legit show and other people might be interested. So consider leaving us a review. That really helps out the podcast. Without further ado, this is episode 9, Paige Smathers, RN, and I'm glad you're here listening. I'm here with Paige Smathers. She's a RD, which is a registered dietitian.
Yep.
Is that how that goes?
Yeah,
okay.
That's how that goes.
So tell me we were talking just a little bit about how the process is to become a dietitian. What got you on that path to say, hey, I want to be the RD?
Well, I'm one of those weird people who knew what I wanted to do since I was age 14. So I went to a career day at my high school, I think when I was a freshman, and went and listened to a registered dietitian talk about her job. And that day I was like, yep, that's what I want to do. And I never changed my mind. So kind of crazy, but it's obviously evolved throughout the years of what interests me, and what I thought being a dietitian was when I was 14 was very different than the reality. But yeah, it's been great.
Was it a severe difference, or did you find yourself becoming more specialized as you went into it?
You kind of it's sort of a naivete of youth, right? Where you're just like, well, I'm gonna solve the world's problems by, carbohydrate, fat, and protein. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute. A lot of times people who struggle with food and might be seeking out your services don't necessarily need more education. They need help with behavior change and help with a mindset. And so, yeah, it has evolved throughout the years of being a little less nutrient focused, a little less education focused, and a little bit more in the realm of motivational interviewing and behavior change focus, and kind of de-emphasizing things that aren't really helpful long term. Like when people obsess about weight loss, they usually end up, eating way worse than when they just try to take good care of themselves. So
do you find that is because more of they get so hyper focused on doing so well that when they maybe eat something they know that they shouldn't, or that they think that they shouldn't, then they just give it all up?
Yeah, it's a lot of all or nothing thinking. So that's kind of what you're describing there.
Yeah.
It's a lot of guilt and shame. It's a lot of cyclical sort of like, okay, I'm back on the bandwagon. And then you make one little, what you perceive as a mistake, which is just maybe, normal, like enjoying a slice of cake on your birthday or something. And you say, well, all is ruined, so I might as well eat 5 pieces of cake, and so people who get really rigid about rules with nutrition, and they do it with good intentions, and they do it because that's what they think they need to do. It actually typically leads to worse outcomes, both from an eating perspective, but also from like a mental health perspective. And so, I quickly learned when I started practicing that you have to take into account a person's mental well-being as you're giving nutrition advice, because you cannot separate the two. They're the same thing,
Well, it sounds like you've been trained in motivational interviewing, which is a very therapeutic. I mean, I use motivational interviewing.
Right. Yeah.
Was that a part of your schooling?
It was. Yeah.
Nice.
And also, a lot of what you kind of have to do when you're in this realm of working one-on-one with people, counseling, basically nutrition therapy. It's kind of best practice to participate in some type of clinical supervision. So I have a few opportunities with local opportunities. And then I also invest in my own clinical supervision with someone that I really trust and admire, who's in my field, who, I can just talk to her about some of these things and say, hey, am I crazy? Am I doing this right? What would your suggestions be? So there's ongoing training of just to make sure that you're not ever causing anyone to have more issues than they already have,
Yeah. And as I was putting the questions that I have for you today and thinking about what we would talk about, I found myself shifting into wanting to know nutrition. Like a lot of the questions, like, no, okay. I remember talking to her. We had this conversation. It was like, it's not so much I'm going to tell you how to eat, but working with behaviors. And I found that was kind of interesting for me to be like, okay, so what do you do? And like how many grams and all this stuff. But it sounds a lot like you approach it from a different way than just strictly education and nutrition, that people don't need that as much.
Well, so I would actually encourage you to ask the questions you want to ask, and then I'll model sort of how I approach those things with
perfect.
my answers. Like I don't shy away from like, okay, you need to focus on, such and such nutrient during pregnancy, but I come at it from like a really practical perspective where the average person is not really wanting to count grams of, iron, and that's not really very realistic. And it's actually could produce worse outcomes if we're feeling like we need to count and track and measure. That can kind of exacerbate issues.
Sounds overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm all about like what's practical and realistic for a person. And a lot of that specific nutrient recommendations are just not practical from a practical perspective.
Gotcha. So we've got a way that you could eat perfectly, I guess, in a perfect world, if you could have all the grams that you need and stuff. And then there's practical and what you can achieve.
I don't even think there is a perfect way of eating.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I don't even think that exists. And so, if you're aiming for perfection, you're going to constantly fall short and feel like a total failure and participate in all that all or nothing thinking and all that guilt and shame around food.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no way to, especially with the recommendations we have, we could get into this, but one example is the recommendation for sodium is so low that you literally would have to adopt an eating disorder to eat that low of sodium every day. Like you wouldn't be able to get adequate calories. You wouldn't be able to get adequate carbohydrate. Yeah.
So I'd have to give up mustard.
Yeah.
There's like 500 milligrams of sodium.
Well, of course it does, because it's a condiment, right? Mm-hmm. Sauces, condiments, things that are supposed to like add flavor and you don't put a bunch on. The purpose of that is to give you a flavor. And what flavors food? Well, fat, sodium, or sugar. It's pretty much one of those three, right? So like that, that's another thing I like to teach people about, is how like, when you're looking at a food label, you want to make sure that you're looking, kind of using your common sense knowledge of like, what would you expect to see? And then don't be surprised when you look at the label and you see carbohydrates with yogurt. Well, of course, because milk is a carbohydrate. Like, and what is yogurt made out of? It's made out of milk. So if a yogurt says carb-free yogurt, you need to kind of like roll your eyes and be like, okay, that's weird. my yogurt should not be carb free, just like bread should not be carb free, you know?
Yeah, because they're carbs.
Yeah.
Totally.
But I digress.
Well, and I love it. As you're speaking to this, I'm like, oh, nice, because you're teaching me about, I don't know, a lot of the things that I worry about all the time anyways, not being pregnant, just being me.
Just being you. Yeah. No, I mean, so just to speak really quickly to your question about, you were talking about how you were generating the outline for today and you're like feeling like, oh, I know she doesn't really talk about that aspect of nutrition. I do. I just don't think it's the end all be all most important thing. So I'll just answer your questions in a way that I think would be helpful to your listeners, practical, realistic.
I love it.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go about it that way.
Okay, perfect.
I'm curious, do you have a specialty group of people or specific individuals you really enjoy working with or that you specialize in?
Yeah, I really like working with chronic dieters. So people who kind of are, this is sort of maybe a corny phrase, but like at diet rock bottom, where you're just like, okay, I've tried every single diet out there and I'm convinced they don't work, but I want to take good care of myself. I just don't know how if it's not like a plan or a program or a diet. Those are like my favorite nice. People, because there is hope and there is an alternative that's really practical and really down to earth and really just like it resonates with your soul. It just makes sense. I've actually had some feedback from people that say, well, I'm suspicious because it makes too much sense. Some people say that to me. So
it has to be hard in order to be like,
wait,
okay.
You're giving me too simple of an answer. I don't like it. And then I love that. And just another thing I love to help people with is family feeding dynamics. So helping with picky eating sometimes is how it's manifest, or sometimes there's some power struggles between parent and child in the feeding relationship. So I really like helping families work through that as well. And then there's specific conditions that I specialize in, like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. I also am a trained diabetes educator. I'm not certified, but I'm trained to be able to provide that. And I also work a lot with eating disorders. So that's kind of my scope. That's kind of what I do.
Cool. And you've got a podcast.
Yeah, I do.
The Nutrition Matters podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. I've listened to a few of them as we met just a couple months ago, so I've been keeping up on them. You've got a new one out about, and I forget the acronym, but the
PCOS. Yeah, exactly.
PCOS.
Yep.
So I haven't been able to listen to that one yet, but I love the one about your raising intuitive eaters. Raising intuitive eaters.
Oh yeah,
that was phenomenal.
With Anna Metz. Yeah.
And the other one that blew my mind was the one that you were talking about. It was an older one, apparently, one that you'd reposted about
gotcha.
The body. No, she wasn't a bodybuilder. Model? She was a fitness model. And just her process of being in a place that was like, I have to, what we were talking about, being perfect. I have to eat this many and I can't eat that and I won't eat this, and just feeling horrible if you ever strayed from it.
Do you see why I shy away from like, this is exactly how much you should be eating? Because people like her, which there's a lot of people like that out there, they glom onto your every word and they treat it as if it's like the end all be all. And guess what? Whoever tells you that you need to be eating X amount of grams of carbohydrate, fat, or protein in a day, they're making it up. Like there's, I mean, yeah, there's some guidelines, but there are always ranges. There's no, it's never needs to be like on the dot exact. So when you hear stories like hers, Maddie Moon, you can kind of understand where I'm coming from when I'm like, hey, let's talk about what really matters. And that's why my podcast is called Nutrition Matters, because we're talking about what really matters instead of, kind of all this peripheral stuff that just sometimes makes things worse for people.
Yeah. And I thought that was phenomenal that we just had the ability to, or when I was listening to it, I was like, that makes so much sense that someone can always be in charge of what you're eating, and you can get completely neurotic about what is going in your body, and there's so much shame that follows behind it. And I had a buddy that did on the fluke modeling at one point in time, and they'll tell you exactly what you need to change. Even these models that are perfect bodied is what we see on the magazines with Adriana Lima and all that stuff. And he was modeling with her, and they're like, oh, you could do this and this to change. And he's like, why?
Yeah.
It's just crazy. And we've digressed from what the topic of the thing is, but this just fascinates me. Nutrition does.
Good. Good. Well, I'm glad we're talking about it.
Yeah, me too. So as what we're talking about specifically today, I wanted to know a little bit more about what we can do to prepare ourselves for pregnancy, what to eat, maybe in preparation as well as during and after. And just to kind of start us out, is there anything that you would recommend as people are thinking of getting pregnant? Sometimes it becomes a surprise and we're not preparing for it, but sometimes we're like, hey, I'd like to.
Right.
And what would, I don't know, if someone comes in and says, I'm looking to get pregnant and I want to make sure my body's in an okay place, what things do we start looking for nutrition-wise to help be the best to make a baby?
Yeah, that's a really important thing. And I think I could give you kind of the canned dietitian answer, which I think is important, but then I can also give you the answer as someone who works with real people and also someone who's been pregnant myself. So I'll give you the canned answer first. I don't know if that's fair to say, but whatever. But so with pregnancy, to prepare your body and to be in the best physical state possible, really it's all about three things, which is just good principles of nutrition for anybody. So one is moderation, one is balance, and one is variety. So all of those things become really important to make sure that your body is as healthy as possible. So you want to make sure that you're eating regular meals throughout the day. That doesn't necessarily need to be, 6 small meals. There's nothing magical about 6 small meals. If that's what works for you, great. But maybe trying to aim for at least 3 times a day. So 3 meals. And when you look down at your plate, trying to look for some form of starch or carbohydrate, some protein, fruits, vegetables, trying to fill your plate up with those things to kind of balance things out. And then obviously we haven't mentioned fat. Fat is an important part of a healthy, well-balanced plate. So not being afraid to add some avocado or a little bit of olive oil or salad dressing or dipping, carrots in ranch when you eat them, or adding a little bit of butter to your pancake in the morning or whatever it might be. Just making sure that you're getting all of those different food groups. And, really what most people kind of need to do, and granted there are exceptions to this, but most people just could do better to focus a little bit more on fruits and vegetables, right? So stocking your fridge with in-season fruits and veggies and making sure that those are on your plate in addition to, the pancake you're eating in the morning and the ham sandwich you're eating in the midday and the pasta you're eating at night. No big deal to eat those things, but maybe we just want to, instead of eating chips on the side, eat grapes and eat, a green salad and just get more colorful plant-based fruits and vegetables in with what you're already eating is probably the best kind of practical advice I could give. But when I come at it from the perspective of someone who understands what it's like to get pregnant and what it's like to have everybody commenting about what your body's going to do or what their body did when they were pregnant. Yes. And, so we could do this nutrient conversation. I just think that that's kind of boring compared to the fact that when you are thinking about getting pregnant, one of the most important things you can do is prepare yourself mentally for all the comments, for gaining weight. I mean, that's a big thing to wrap your head around. And it's also kind of scary. You kind of have to ask yourself, am I saying goodbye to my body as I know it? And chances are yeah, you probably are. And that's a tough thing. And the reason that this has to do with nutrition is that this is something you need to do to prepare yourself so that you're continuing to nourish yourself. Because some women get so freaked out about weight gain and so freaked out about, making sure they're doing exactly the perfect things during pregnancy so that they don't gain too much weight or so that their baby gets just the right amount of nutrients, whatever it might be. They underfeed themselves, and that can lead to more morning sickness. That can lead to
no way.
Yeah, a bunch of the baby not growing appropriately. It can lead to you being moody, grumpy. I mean, you're already kind of those things when you're pregnant sometimes. So one of the biggest things that I could kind of sum up in preparation for a pregnancy would be for sure nutrition, and take that prenatal vitamin at least 3 months ahead of time. Kind of every single day, get your body, your stores up. of your different nutrients. But then also from a mental perspective, like really work on your own approach to food, your relationship with it, your relationship with exercise, making sure that you've wrapped your head around weight gain, because that can be really difficult to deal with.
And that was one of the things that as I put out on Facebook, I asked some people about what they wish they would have known, what they were told, advice that they were given. And some of that stuff was, like, oh, this is how it was very based on how to not gain weight and how to keep your body the same, avoiding stretch
you need
marks.
to gain weight. Can we just take a minute to talk about why you need to gain weight and where it goes? Okay. Thank you. I'm going to get on my soapbox.
Let's do it. I want to hear it.
Okay. So, by the time your baby is ready to be born, your baby's around 7 pounds. So there's 7 pounds that you need to gain, but it's just the baby, right? Then there's the placenta that typically weighs around 2 to 3 pounds. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of blood, a lot of fluid, right? Then there's amniotic fluid that's around 3 pounds. So you need to keep track of the math here, okay?
Okay. So we
have
7 plus 2, which is 9, 3 and 12. So 12 pounds.
So 12 so
just
far.
Just for a baby.
Well, no, but I'm not done.
Oh, okay.
I'm not even done.
We're at 12.
Yeah, so we're at 12. And then, your boobs grow. Can I say boobs on your podcast?
Yeah, you can say boobs. Yeah.
Okay. Like breast tissue needs to enlarge to be able to create milk, right? Mm-hmm. So like your boobs will grow, and like estimations are anywhere from 1 to 2 pounds of breast tissue grows during pregnancy. So that's 14. Okay. And then what we have next is your body requires a little bit of extra fat to be able to support breastfeeding. Mm-hmm. So that's another 10 to 12, maybe 15 pounds of
24 to 26 now.
Okay. And I'm not even done. There's also blood volume needs to increase. And I forget the exact number. I wish I'd looked this up ahead of time, but your blood volume increases significantly with pregnancy. That makes sense. You have to have all this extra blood and fluid to be able to support a baby. So you know how you look at a pregnant woman's face and you can kind of see that it looks fuller, and she just looks kind of like she's retaining some water, and it's not a bad thing. It just she looks different when she's pregnant.
Yeah.
A lot of that has to do with blood volume increase. So that's anywhere from 3 to 5 pounds. So that brings us to around 30 pounds of weight gain. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So when you have the baby, you have the placenta, the fluid, the baby, all of that comes out, and you're left with the increased breast tissue plus the increased fat stores. Mm-hmm. And eventually your blood volume goes down, but it takes a few weeks, and there you go. That's why you need to gain weight. It's all to support that baby. Now, if you're starting off at a higher weight, you don't need to gain quite as much weight. If you're starting off at a lower weight, you need to gain even more than that, because your body needs that adequate fat store to support breastfeeding. So I think sometimes breaking it down and understanding where that weight is going and why you need to gain it, and kind of, I think that could sometimes help people wrap their head around kind of a difficult issue. I want to definitely be supportive in the fact that it's a little bit of a leap of faith to be like, hey, body, treat me well. Let's see how this goes,
Yeah. And to think that you got to look a certain way. And there's even media around how celebrities look when they're pregnant, and how they don't have this and they don't have that, or they do have this. And
right. I mean, that's
so unfair.
Totally what we talk about with pregnancy, or even postpartum, is like, oh, look how fast she lost the weight.
Yeah. And
it's not fair, because we can get into that, but it's just harmful. It really is.
Totally.
And so there's this whole mental aspect of pregnancy that you just have to wrap your brain around. And, I will say some women find that it's easier to eat well and to nourish their bodies and to move their bodies and to be comfortable in their bodies. There are some women who find that pregnancy just is so easy to love themselves, easier than normal life, even though they're gaining weight, and even though they're retaining fluid or whatever it might be. But I think in general, I'd say it's safe to say most people, it's kind of hard.
Yeah. It sounds like it, especially if you're not mentally prepping yourself. You're like, okay, I've got to try and gain only 15 pounds instead of 30 or 40 or wherever my body's going to go. And then if it starts to go that way and you're not sure why, I mean, this makes a whole lot more sense to me. I had no idea that you kind of naturally blood doped yourself for a baby.
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, think about it. This little tiny cell 9 months later is a fully functioning human being. Like that's insane. And you're literally growing a human inside of you. That's why you're so exhausted. That's why you want to sleep all day. That's why, you have to eat so much. It's just, it's a lot of work. You're growing a skeleton, a nervous system, cardiovascular system. I mean, it's insane when you just contemplate it for even 2 minutes, what you're doing. So of course you're going to gain weight. And it's silly to even put any effort towards, trying to restrict that your body will do what it does if you treat it right. And it knows how much it needs to gain to have a healthy baby. You just need, your job is to do your best to honor your body.
And it sounds like honoring your body honors the fact that you are different. You are a woman that is unlike any other woman, and you are going to react to pregnancy differently than other women are going to react.
Right.
Maybe some on the same scale, but you are going to have your experience.
Absolutely. And I sometimes hesitate telling my own story because I don't want to talk too much about me, but I was pregnant at the exact same time as one of my really good friends, and we gained very different amounts of weight, and we started off at very different weights. She was way smaller than me, gained way more weight than I did, and retained a lot more water than I did, and had some different symptoms than I did, felt very differently during a pregnancy, but we're both just fine. We're both just fine. And we have these beautiful girls who we love. And I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind is part of what you're learning during pregnancy and also during delivery, I feel, is how to trust your body and how to trust yourself, because I almost feel like on kind of like a higher, almost spiritual level, like this is the purpose of, having 9 months and having that experience of delivering a baby is to teach you how powerful you are and how much you can be trusted and how you're this baby's mother. And that can be really empowering during parenthood, which is a whole nother story, right?
Yeah. And I'm going to try and refrain from it because I've got so many questions about like nutrition and parenting and but that's why you've got your podcast, which is super cool.
There's a lot to talk about.
There is. And as you're explaining a lot of this, I'm just going to go over some of the responses I got from Facebook when I asked, what do you wish that you would have known? What advice did people give to you? It seemed like a lot were coming from friends, specifically family as well. But some of them were eat whatever you want, don't eat too much, don't eat at all, and only eat raw. That was like the spectrum.
Don't eat at all?
Yeah. But one person's grandma was like, you know what? At about 6 months, she's like, you know what? You've gained some weight. Like, you don't really need to eat at all.
Oh, wow.
And she's like, I understand this is horrible advice, but this is what my grandma told me.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that's fascinating. I think grandma's generation was really very different in terms of how they talked about weight gain during pregnancy. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're getting advice from someone over the age of like 70, like just kind of go ahead and say, okay, grandma, great. And then, do your own thing. And I've actually heard that too from kind of the older generation. I feel like that it was the norm to be like, hey, just gain like 10 pounds.
And then be done.
Yeah. It's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. So eat raw. Okay. That's funny. Where do you want me to go with this?
I guess, yeah. I didn't even know where to go with it too, because the raw, from what I understand, raw is we are looking at, if you're going to eat broccoli, you're going to eat it in its raw form. And I thought of raw meat too. I don't know if that's necessarily something.
That is definitely contraindicated in pregnancy.
Okay.
Because you have a higher risk of having eat raw meat. Oh my gosh. Okay.
You just said raw, so I don't know if it's like raw meat,
well,
raw milk.
Let's specify. So raw meat is like a no-no during pregnancy.
Raw meat's bad.
Because you actually have a higher risk of getting sick when you're pregnant. Your immune system is lower. And so part of the recommendations about nutrition during pregnancy have to do with that fact. So, the recommendation is to fully cook all your meat, making sure that anytime you're eating something left over, you're heating it up to at least 165 degrees, which is just short form, practically that just means hot. Deli meat is not really recommended because there's a chance that deli meat can have listeria, which is a form of foodborne illness that it can actually abort a fetus at any point during a pregnancy. Whoa. So there's some things about nutrition recommendations during pregnancy that are just geared towards let's reduce the risk of you getting sick. Because if anyone's been sick with foodborne illness at, 6 months pregnant, the baby's kicking and you're barfing, that's really fun. I've had that happen. It was pretty awful.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah. So, okay, eating raw. Where do I go with this? Well, we could get into kind of the minutia, but the idea is raw fruits and vegetables, vegetables specifically, have a lot of fiber, and fiber is a molecule. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on that. Fiber is a substance that is very kind of like big and tough, and it's indigestible. And so there can be nutrients that are locked within that fiber that can't be utilized by the enzymes that are breaking down your food in your digestive tract. So in other words, fiber is in a higher quantity in uncooked vegetables. And once you cook a vegetable, you break down some of that fiber, which makes it so that your enzymes can get to more of your nutrients. So it's really silly advice to only eat raw, because you might be missing out on some key nutrients if you only ate raw. So really moderation, balance, variety, right? So
gotcha.
Moderation, balance in terms of like what's balanced on your plate, moderation in terms of have a moderate approach and a moderate mindset towards food. Don't eat, just pasta, but don't eat just salad either. But variety in terms of the color of your fruits and vegetables, and in terms of the source of grain, and in terms of the type of protein that you're eating, but also variety in terms of how you're cooking it. Because not only like we are not robots, right? We're not just like putting input into our mouth to have output, right? We are human beings with feelings and with desires and with opinions and with likes and dislikes and preferences. And so part of what we're trying to do when we're eating is to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And if you're just eating raw broccoli, I mean, you can do that, but like, ew.
Yeah, gross.
Right? I'd way rather eat cooked broccoli, or
me too,
steamed broccoli, and then maybe sometimes raw or sometimes stir fried. Or so the idea is variety in terms of sources of different foods within food groups, but then also variety in cooking methods is really important, because you get certain nutrients that are heat sensitive. So when you cook broccoli, for example, there's vitamin C in broccoli, and vitamin C is heat sensitive. So when you cook it, you get less vitamin C. But, vitamin C is found in lots of green vegetables, lots of citrus fruits too. So you can probably get the adequate amount of vitamin C in a day if you are eating a wide variety of foods. Mm-hmm. So the raw thing is kind of silly, not only for pregnancy, but also just for anybody. You don't need to just eat raw. You can eat raw things. You really should and can cook things to enjoy them, and also to get a variety of nutrients.
The balance, variety, and
moderation.
The M. Moderation. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Those are
like my 3 favorite words.
I'm loving them. So then we've got eat whatever you want. We got the other side of the spectrum of, or we got the two sides of the spectrum. Don't eat it all, and then eat whatever you want. Just kind of flow with it. If you want cake, eat cake. If you want, I don't know. What are your thoughts on just like eating whatever you want?
So I think that there is some wisdom to that, because, and this is nuanced, right? So I'll try to do a good job of not talking too long, but when you are in the earlier stage of your pregnancy, you might have a lot of sickness. You might feel really nauseous, and sometimes you might really only feel like eating apple slices, or you might only feel like eating oatmeal, or you might only feel like eating crackers. And part of what's going on with many cases of morning sickness is that you're just freaking hungry. Mm-hmm. And your body kind of tells you you're hungry through nausea, which is counterintuitive to eat more. You're like, well, gosh, I feel like I'm going to barf, so why would I eat? But really, not eating makes it worse. And so in some regards, the idea of just eating what you want actually makes a bunch of sense, because your body, like, you get really sensitive to smells and tastes, and like things kind of gross you out that normally don't. And so if you can just get something in your stomach, that's a whole lot better than being, like skipping meals. So remember how I said earlier, like just eating 3 meals, there's nothing magical about 6 small meals. Well, during pregnancy, sometimes there is something magical about eating 6 small meals. Mm-hmm. Eating smaller, more frequent meals can actually be a really important kind of preemptive strike against morning sickness.
Really?
So Yeah. And sometimes we get really wrapped up in like, oh no, I haven't eaten many vegetables because they make me feel like I'm going to throw up. And people can get really worried about the nutritional content of what they're eating during pregnancy. And yeah, it's ideal to try to still eat well balanced and to try to make sure you're getting, lots of good balance in your day. But if you're so sick that just one thing sounds good, I'd say go with it and make sure you're eating regular meals throughout your day to try to help yourself not feel so sick. When you move into the stage of pregnancy where you're feeling better, where you're not feeling quite as sick, I wouldn't really recommend just like donuts all day or, unlimited amounts of cake. I'd say a donut is probably fine, but what you want to do is you want to pay attention. Like when I eat this, how do I feel? I know in my pregnancies, sometimes I would be really craving or kind of feel like, oh, a carb type food sounds good. And then I would eat it and it would kind of make me feel a little lethargic and almost more sick. And then I noticed that if I would eat a protein food in combination with that carbohydrate, even though the protein source didn't really sound good, like I didn't really feel like yogurt, or I didn't really feel like cheese, or I didn't really feel like, chicken or something like that. If I could just get that in with the carb that kind of sounded more appealing, I would feel way, way, way better. So this is something to kind of experiment with. And I'd say the biggest deal with morning sickness is just staying on top of that hunger. Because once you get a huge caloric deficit built up, it's really hard to climb out of it. And you feel so more and more and more sick the
sounds like
hungrier you get. Yeah.
And then you get more hungry, and then the nausea even sets in more, so you don't want to eat as much, but you need to eat more.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Oh, yeah, that sounds like a horrible cycle.
Yeah.
And then with you saying that almost like this compromise, and I love that you were putting it into like we're not robots. So it's after input, you don't necessarily just be like, all right, well, now I've eaten and now I go about my day, but eating and then processing and recognizing what your body feels like 20 minutes after, an hour and a half after, wherever you're at. And
definitely
checking in with yourself.
Right, exactly.
Like, ooh, that was not what I needed, or what else can I mix with it? What's this compromise I can make to make it so I feel a little bit better if I combine things?
Right. And that's typically good advice is carbohydrate and protein and fat, hopefully at every meal and snack. So those are the 3 macronutrients, just a little nutrition lesson here.
Ooh.
So your body gets calories via carbohydrate, protein, and or fat. So all foods that you eat is either 1, 2, or 3 of those things. So when people like back in the day were on this low fat kick, what were they doing? Well, they were just eating more carbohydrate. And it's not bad to eat carbohydrate. You need it, but it's ideal to eat all 3 things in balance with each other because they do different things in terms of satisfaction. So carbs are kind of easy to grab, but they don't really last as long. Whereas fat and protein kind of don't fill you up and don't satisfy you quite as much, especially when they don't have a carbohydrate with them. But they help you last a bit longer. So it's ideal to, when you're sitting down, especially during pregnancy, and you're thinking, oh, what can I eat? And you think, okay, a cracker sounds okay. Well, if you could, eat a string cheese with it, or if you could grab a yogurt too, that's probably going to go down better and be more satisfying.
And give you long-term.
Yeah. And help you with not feeling nauseous 10 minutes later again when the carbohydrate from the cracker is kind of waned.
The big burst of energy is gone.
Yeah.
So a couple of the other ones that I thought were interesting, someone said 80 grams of protein a day. Is that a common thing? I think that just sounded like a lot of beef jerky to me. I was like, wow, I would totally pound 80 grams of protein if I can do it in beef jerky. So you
do need a bit more protein when you're pregnant than normal, but protein requirements depends on how much you weigh. So, if you're a 105-pound female, like you're not probably going to need 80 grams of protein during pregnancy. But if you're a 180-pound female, you might need more than that. So it's a little bit of a silly kind of like, where is that even coming from? What's the magic of the number 80? Like, I don't know.
It might have been that individual that was recommended for her specifically.
Sure. And that could have been someone who met with a dietitian who had gestational diabetes, and they were talking about, okay, how much protein do you need? How much carbohydrate? How much fat? That sounds a little bit more intense and in-depth and detailed than the average person probably needs.
Totally.
The average person probably needs to just know that, they probably need to try to eat 6 small meals a day, and at each meal, try to get some form of protein with that. Yeah.
Is that go along with vitamin B12? Is that a specific thing you need extra of?
You do need a bit more folate during pregnancy, and you need more iron specifically. So, and B12 is found in animal products. So with eating more iron, you're naturally going to be eating more B12. You do need a bit more of almost every nutrient during pregnancy, just because, you're not just feeding your body, you're supporting a developing body, obviously. So you need a bit more calcium, you need a bit more vitamin D. And so what that typically means is you can try to sort of fill in the blanks with a prenatal vitamin, but obviously it's ideal to try to just eat a bit more. So if you're eating slightly higher quantities of food than you used to, and it doesn't need to be double, right? It's not really eating for two. Occasionally you might be really hungry and need about a double portion, but in general, like day to day, you just need probably, slightly more, maybe the equivalent of like an extra peanut butter sandwich with some banana on it. Gotcha. It doesn't need to be like, okay, every meal I'm double portioning. So where was I going with that? I'm like forgetting. Sorry.
Well, we were talking just a little bit about how I think you'd finished your thought when it comes to vitamin B12. You're going to need just a little bit more of everything, but you don't need to double it up.
Right. And you can get that through a prenatal vitamin, but it's ideal to try to kind of, include a little bit more fruits and vegetables, include a bit more milk, include a bit more maybe red meat than normal. It's really high in iron to help make sure that you're kind of because it's not all about vitamins and minerals in pregnancy that's important. It's about energy too, right? So you need more calories. So if you're just relying on that multivitamin and then eating the exact same way, you might not gain weight the way that you need to, and you might not have the energy to like keep up with day-to-day life when you're pregnant. So some of that's just about calories.
Good to know.
Too.
Yeah. When it comes to cravings, is there a significant meaning behind cravings, or a way that you can, read yourself a little bit more? Did you have cravings when you were pregnant?
Kind of, but I'm not a super craving-y type person. And I don't think anyone really has the answer to this. I think some people will claim, oh yeah, it has total wisdom and here's what it means. And let me tell you what to think about your cravings. Food definitely tastes different, and food definitely has a different appeal and smells different. And like some things just like sound repulsive. It was more for me, it was like, okay, I just know I don't want to eat that. I don't know what I want to eat, but I know it's not that.
It's not this.
Yeah. And there were occasional times where I was like, ooh, I need an egg roll, like a Chinese egg roll, like random. I don't know what that was about, but or like I need puffy Cheetos. That was another one, really weird. But I never did the classic ice cream and pickles.
That's the one that I've also heard dirt before.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I really want to eat dirt right now.
Yeah. So
like, ooh.
That didn't happen to me. That's called pica. And pica is where you kind of have this desire to eat a non-food item. And that's actually pretty common in pregnancy. That's definitely something to bring up with your doctor if that's going on for you. There's also like sometimes sponges, dirt, sometimes like bark, like non-food items can kind of sometimes seem really appealing. And there are theories in the literature that this perhaps has to do with a nutrient deficiency, namely iron usually, but nobody really knows what that's about.
But it's not solid. Okay.
Yeah. So it's okay. It's okay to kind of honor your cravings, but I wouldn't say, oh, I want ice cream, therefore I'm just going to eat, 4 times more than maybe I normally would. A normal serving is probably just fine. Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you need to like totally, go overboard on everything and then feel super lethargic and whatever.
Totally. Some of and we might have already covered a lot of this, or this may sound almost repetitive, but I saw a lot of diets coming up that I'd never seen. So we got like I think it's the keto diet or the keto diet. Keto. And starting that 8 weeks before pregnancy so you can deal with weight, which we've kind of talked about.
Oh, for crying out loud. Yeah. No way. Don't you dare.
Don't?
No.
The keto diet's bad.
No. Gosh, yes.
I don't even know what it is.
Okay. So the ketogenic diet.
Okay.
Originally is in existence basically. It's a very low carbohydrate diet, like extremely low carbohydrate diet.
So no sprint burst energies. We're all talking protein.
Well, you cannot possibly eat all your calories from protein. Like it just doesn't work. So what it is, it's mostly fat.
Oh, okay.
You're eating mostly fat and then some protein and then a very tiny amount of carbohydrate. And this diet was created or was discovered, I guess, because it does sometimes help with epilepsy in young kids. So they put young kids who have epilepsy on this diet, and for some reason the high fat helps to minimize seizures. And I learned about this in school back in the day, and it was like, whoa, that's such a weird diet, crazy. And then, a couple years ago, people start to talk about, oh yeah, I'm doing the keto diet. And I'm just like, okay, that is not that's not a sustainable, realistic way of eating. I mean, you can't go to a birthday party. You can't go out to eat. You can't hang out with your friends. You can't, it's so isolating. It's so just everything food is not supposed to be, right? So the whole idea of it is it puts your body into ketosis, which is, we could get into like the details of
So it's
this.
like a body reaction. It's not someone that Dr. Keto came up with it.
No,
it's like ketosis.
Ketogenic, meaning induce ketosis within your body, which, we could talk about this, the nitty gritty, but basically what it is your body needs carbohydrate to function, aka glucose. Carbohydrate, when it's broken down, is glucose, sugar. So your brain needs sugar to function, but your body has this built-in mechanism for starvation, where if there isn't adequate carbohydrate around, what your body can do is it can go into ketosis, which is where it breaks fats down to be kind of like a second form of energy for your brain, that your brain doesn't really like ketone bodies as a fuel source. It prefers glucose, but if glucose isn't around, it'll do that. So that is terrible advice for someone pre-pregnancy, because what's going to happen is your body's going to be in a really wigged out state, and it might even be difficult to get pregnant, first of all. Second of all, you're going to have this rebound effect that once you start eating regular food, it's this pendulum's going to swing from all that restriction you were doing over into like, yeah, now I can eat everything and I'm pregnant. And so who cares? And you might really start eating and feel extremely out of control, like you would even if you weren't pregnant. But then you add that, it's gonna have some consequences and some rebound effects. So if anyone thinks that that's a good idea to like make it so that they lose weight right before pregnancy or something, I'd say that's definitely contraindicated, not a good idea.
Okay, good to know.
Sorry, I know I get really fired up and opinionated.
I love the passion you have. When it comes to, so I always saw my mom eating this this black panda licorice. I don't even know what it was called. Does black licorice provide, I don't know, maybe I'm asking the same question in a different variation, but I mean, does black licorice do anything for you, or is that maybe just something she preferred?
That I don't know anything about that.
She probably just preferred it then. I was always like, oh, mom's pregnant, because I saw the black panda licorice was all over the house.
That just might be something she craved in particular.
She must have.
Something that can actually kind of help with morning sickness, though, is ginger tea. So like, or even just like ginger, like in your foods, like the raw ginger root. Sometimes even just smelling it can be helpful to kind of like ease some nausea.
With the nausea.
So that's actually true if you're not pregnant too. That's always something to like check with your doctor, make sure you're good to consume it. I never want to like make nutrition recommendations in a podcast, but ginger tends to sometimes be really soothing on the stomach. So even like ginger ale can be kind of helpful sometimes too. But as far as black licorice, I don't know if there's anything magical there. You could have discovered something new with that. I don't know.
as an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
How about when people are getting towards the end of pregnancy and they're like, I want this baby out of me. I hear a lot of recommendations. I think my mom even drank castor oil to get me to come earlier, and I wasn't about to have it, so I was still 2 weeks late. But
2 weeks late. That is brutal.
Yeah, I was mean.
That is mean. As far as I know, this is maybe I'm probably not the best person to answer this question, but there's really nothing nutritional you can do to force a baby to come out. I
think that in of itself is super important to know. You don't need to change a ton of things.
Well, and you get really desperate. You're like, it's like waiting for Christmas and then Christmas coming and going and then being like, okay, like really, like when is this going to be? When is this deadline going to be here? It's a really bizarre mental thing that you go through when a baby's overdue. It's rough. So I can totally see where people are coming from, where they're just like, I will do anything. I hear spicy food. I hear
jumping on a trampoline, although it's not nutritional, but
well, and also sex. Sex is like probably one of the things that I think is the most evidence-based. Like I don't think that there is
the oxytocin and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've actually heard of, this didn't happen to me, but I have had a few friends who like the midwife is like, okay, like you're in the hospital, you're kind of in labor, but we need this to like be sped up. So I'm going to leave the room and you and your husband are going to like hang out together and like, wink, wink, nod, nod, and we'll see you in 20 minutes. And for her, that was like, boom, that's what she needed to do. So there is, I do think that there is some evidence that is perhaps helpful, but it's probably only helpful if you already are kind of in this state where your body's pretty much like, yep, we're doing this.
And anything you're eating too is the baby's also getting that.
Yeah.
So if you're eating really spicy food, I don't know what it does to the fetus, or I know if you're breastfeeding, that can affect, whatever you're eating, the baby's eating. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know specifically about like the experience of a fetus who just had a mother who's ate something spicy. Like, I don't know how that affects the baby. But they're obviously getting fed through the umbilical cord. So it's not like they're tasting the food, but it might, I don't know. It might feel different. I have no idea. That's a really interesting question. But as far as breastfeeding a baby, there will be flavors that can kind of come through to the milk sometimes. And sometimes moms will notice like, oh, when I eat this, the baby really does not love that. But I say eat all the foods while you're nursing to kind of get your baby used to some different flavors. Don't be bland and weird, because then maybe your baby won't be excited about any new foods.
Totally.
I think they can deal with it. They can deal with a little spicy milk.
Nice. With some spicy milk. Speaking of that, so after you have a baby, are there any recommendations of nutrition, or is it kind of the same thing as you are like taking care of yourself and recovering from this trauma of having a baby?
Totally. Yeah. No, I actually think of this is a very, very important conversation to have, that I feel like there's so much emphasis on what to do before and during pregnancy. And then it's kind of like, okay, you got the baby here. So just like the conversation about nutrition afterwards kind of seems almost neglected. So it's a great question. No matter how your baby came into the world, whether it's a vaginal birth or a C-section, you're going to have to heal. There's some things that happened with your body. And anytime we're talking about like wound healing or recovering from surgery or birth or delivery, is you really want to focus on making sure that you're getting adequate calories, meaning energy, and that you're getting enough protein. So protein becomes really important with wound healing. So if you have your baby and you might have like a really bizarre dip in appetite the first couple weeks after or postpartum. And, meanwhile, you're not sleeping. Meanwhile, your whole day is spent feeding your baby, changing your baby's diaper, putting your baby down for a nap, trying to sleep yourself. It's like, it can be very difficult to kind of decide, oh, my baby's down for a nap. I could either sleep or I could eat. And for a lot of new moms, it's like, meh, I don't care about eating. I just need to sleep because you're so freaking tired, right? So nutritionally, postpartum, what you really want to think about is trying to get kind of into a regular schedule again with your eating, where trying to eat something in the morning, trying to eat something in the midday, something at night, having some meals delivered from friends or family who want to help out. I think you should always say yes to that. It might even be a good idea to make some frozen things, keep it in the freezer so that you have easy meals you can just kind of grab and go with. Anytime someone offers to help out, say, sure, you can go to the grocery store and you can get, I need milk and I need bread and I need eggs or whatever. Take people up on their efforts to help you, because it's really, at least in my experience, I had no appetite and all I wanted to do was sleep. I was like, I would way rather sleep than eat. But you don't heal as well. You don't have energy as well as much. I don't know if there's science to back this up, but just from a logical perspective, it makes sense that it could be depressing to not eat enough, right? Like it could hurt your mental health. It could make postpartum depression worse to not be adequately nourished.
Because you got to be nourished, yeah.
Your brain needs food. Yeah. Your brain needs energy. And plus, if you're nursing a baby, like that that'll shoot up your caloric requirements too. And so like, even though your brain might be going to, oh, now that I'm not pregnant anymore, I'm hoping I'm losing weight. I'm going to try on my jeans, see if they fit. Like, don't do that. That's not your job. Your job is not to lose weight. Your job is to be nourished, take care of yourself, take care of your baby, and to let people help you do that. And just you gotta eat regular meals, even if you don't have an appetite.
Yeah. And when at the healing group, when we have women come in for postpartum, whether they want some support or they're feeling depressed, anxious, we have a questionnaire. And one of those questions on there is, or even a checklist of what you can do for yourself to take care of yourself. And one of those is, what are you eating? Like, have you eaten today? And sometimes it's really hard to think like, oh yeah, I haven't eaten.
Well, you're up all night and you're sleeping during the day, and like it feels like one long period of time. It doesn't feel like day and night. It just feels like you're so out of whack and hormonal and in love with your baby, but also like, oh, I just want to sleep and I just want to break. You're going through all this stuff, and food can kind of take a backseat. But the thing about that is, it can make your problems worse. It can make you feel physically like sick when you don't eat, And so it's an important thing to kind of stay on top of, and definitely something people don't talk about very much.
Totally. Well, I really appreciate you being here on Birds and Bees podcast page. If you had something that you want all parents or parents that are expecting to know, is there kind of a takeaway that if there's one thing that you could take away and give to them, what would that be?
That's a great question. I would just say that diets don't work, and, they typically make your problems worse. And these days, diets are kind of masqueraded as plans and programs and philosophies, and, just identify those fads. Don't buy into them. Take really good care of yourself by grocery shopping, planning meals, eating at home, eating well balanced, but don't shy away from the fact that food connects us to each other and to ourselves, and use opportunities with food, whether that's with family or with friends, to enjoy the experience of eating. We're supposed to do that. And as parents, that's one of the best gifts we can give to our kids, is setting the example that we love vegetables and we love fruits and we love wholesome, nutritious foods, but we also love cake for birthdays, and that's fun. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you doing your own work to not diet and to take good care of your body and to not talk negatively about your body around your kids is probably the best gift you could give to them. And I think it starts before pregnancy, like we talked about, like healing your own relationship with food and your body and exercise before pregnancy even starts, and then using pregnancy as a time to really learn how to trust your body. And then as life kind of transitions from one phase to the next, just continuing to stay true to like, I take good care of my body. I do these behaviors that I know work well for me, and I don't buy into all the craziness that just makes things worse. So I don't know if that's a fair answer.
Yeah, that sounds phenomenal. I'm even thinking of it in the way that I can change the way that I think about the food that I end up eating, or the relationship with the body. I love that you pieced together the gift that you can give your kids. And I'd love to go into another one, but we're going to end it here. But essentially being able to give your kids the gift of not worrying about, oh, am I fat? Am I skinny? Especially because they're going through their process of gaining weight as a child, going through puberty and needing that extra. And you don't have to worry about a 6-year-old being, overweight or like trying to get them onto a diet, but really just let them understand healthy running and exercise and eating and just being okay with what they need. And I recommend I think it's episode 75 and 76 for raising intuitive eaters. If
that sounds right. I don't know.
If it's not that one, go look in the 70s.
Go look it up. Okay.
For the Nutrition Matters podcast, because that was very insightful when it comes to talking to your kids and helping your kids understand their relationship with food and healing yours. And I think that's what you do here as well, is help heal that relationship with food. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that's talking about carbs, fats, and proteins, but sometimes that's talking about how we approach food and how we think about it and how we think about our bodies, because all of that plays into the way we eat, right? And it's actually fascinating. We typically make better nutrition choices when we are more at peace in our bodies and more kind of neutral about foods. Charging foods with labels of good and bad and right and wrong and should and shouldn't don't actually lead to better eating. So, and it actually leads to poor health outcomes on every perspective. So that's why I approach things that way. It's not that I'm like, oh, nutrition doesn't matter, or let's not even talk about carbs, fats, and proteins, or vitamins and minerals. Like, yeah, sure, we can talk about that. But what really hits home and what really matters for people is approaching food in a healthy way so that they have the ability to make the decisions that are in their best interest. And that's just really, really hard when you're dieting, or really, really hard when food has all these labels of good and bad. So
Wonderful.
That's why I approach it that way.
How can people get a hold of you if they're interested in more of what you're doing or want to consult with you?
Yeah, so my website is pagesmothersrd.com, or you could just Google my name and it'll be the thing that pops up. And then on there's a few resources. I have a podcast that you've mentioned. I have a blog, and I do one-on-one nutrition therapy as well. So in my office in Salt Lake, and
which is where we are right here, right now. And I take on a few kind of distance clients if it's a good fit, but in general, it's one-on-one. So wonderful.
That's how to find me.
And
also on Instagram and Facebook too.
Yes, and your Instagram is really fun to follow too.
Oh, thanks.
I'll also I'll post these links in the description for this podcast.
Perfect.
But again, thanks so much for being here on Birds and Bees.
Thanks for having me. Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.